Yeah, we did the big one last time, so let's do the big one first this time. MLS Board of Governors have met this week to discuss and ultimately pass spending reform on their roster rules. So this includes, and we'll dive into it a little bit deeper here, the already rumored decoupling of U22 and DP slots, an increase in the number of buyouts per season, and an increase in convertible GAM from your transfer revenue. So for the non-MLS savvy, let's dive into what this means. And we'll start with U22 and DP slots, because that was the first one that came up, right? We did chat about this a few episodes ago, talking about how the designated player and the U22 slots worked together and why decoupling them matters. So we won't go too deep into that, but essentially now you don't need to meet certain criteria to have more of these high level, low impact budget players on your roster, right? So what's really interesting is that there is actually an incentive in this rule now to shift from all DPs to more U22 players if you so choose. So instead of having 3 DPs and 3 U22s like is allowed at the time, like at the current time, you can now actually switch to a 4th U22 slot and also earn an extra $2 million in GAM to spread across your roster for buy downs, mid-level spending, all that good stuff, right? So it also means that teams who have 2 DPs this season, by the time this rule goes into effect, are actually going to also get $1 million of GAM heading into for the rest of this season because of the halfway implementation of this rule, which means we can start seeing these roster changes very, very soon. So I want to throw it over to you first and ask your thoughts on this specific rule change.
I mean, I know the instant reaction is going to be, oh, this is extremely underwhelming. And I know that for a fact because I can see Paul Tenorio's tweet and I can see the comments underneath it. And the top comment, of course, is this is seriously underwhelming. And that's the exact reaction I would expect from people looking at this. And honestly, I would be lying if I said that there wasn't a part of me that felt that a little bit when I first saw it. But I think Paul makes a good point when he's responding back and he's saying that, they're not just going to rip the band-aid off mid-season on changes like these. And if they're going to make these bigger, larger changes, it's going to be in the winter off season before the new season starts, which makes a lot of sense to me. And when you put that into perspective, I think these changes are really good for midseason. I think it's working towards boosting areas of concern with the salary cap that we have talked about, which is mainly the depth. It's something that everybody's been talking about. I saw a Tata Martino quote that was talking about it with CCL or CCC, whatever, wherever you want to call it. And I think having that max 3 million in GAM for transfer revenue, or the extra 2 million in GAM for having the 2 DPs, 4 U22s, is going to be huge for teams to be able to build up that depth and finally have some more money to build a stronger team in total and compete in all these competitions. So I'm fully on board with this. I think it's great. I don't know if did you cover the buyouts already, or we didn't get to
We're
that part
going
yet?
we're going to that next. If you
All right, I
listen,
won't talk about that one yet.
you listen one by one. I know you never listen to anything I say, but
I know I jumped the gun on the GAM one too, but I got too excited. What can I say?
this is why we can't have nice things. This is why we're only number 5 on MLS podcast list and not number 1. Because
This is why we still have roster restrictions.
you know what though? If we did put pro rel in, all of this would go away.
All right, that's it.
Here we go. Now we're
Don't
now,
do that. Don't do that.
no, I agree. I really like this, right? And we spoke about it last time, giving owners the ability to invest in better players with more on-field impact, with less budget impact, will inevitably increase the quality of the team, the play, the league, all of it, right? We know that's going to happen. But my real favorite part about this is that they've actually provided an option of how you want to implement this system in your team, right? So Jim Curtin was asked about this in a press conference, and he talked about how these new rules are going to be used differently between clubs. And to me, it makes it all the more exciting, right? You're going to have the Miamis, the LAs, the people who are going to spend big boy money on all these stars and DPs, and they'll get to have their U22s as well. That's great, but you also are now allowing teams like RBNY, Philly, Dallas, who usually don't use all 3 of their DP slots anyway, most of the time, where now they can not only still invest in the higher level young players that they like to, that's their system, their pathway, but now they're also getting an increase in GAM for mid-level spending or buying down players or what have you to just continue to increase the middle bulk of their roster, which again, is two different ways to build your team. And we have that a little bit now, but I think now you see it take it another step, right? Now you're going to have so many different types of teams in the league now, which I'm really excited to see because it can get a little dull when you've got three designated players and then the rest of it is homegrowns or some mid-level guys. And I think it's really, really nice to see the fact that they are giving different pathways to team building so that you have different types of team in the league. I think that's really exciting. Um, you know, I don't want to say it too quickly, but I do think that we're getting close to just another MLS era. I don't think we've technically even gotten into 4.0 yet. I think this is kind of the step into 4.0, but you're getting to 5.0 even quicker, right? Where you're allowing teams now more variation in the way that they build their teams, more depth in the league in terms of quality and variability and style of play and coaching mechanism. Like it gives so much more flexibility versus, I mean, not to spoil Wednesday's episode, but I was rewatching a game from 2007 for our history episode on Wednesday, and it was one big name player on either side with like one or two solid supporting players, and the rest of them were like, "I'm going to kick this as far as I can and hope." And that was the way the league played. So to continue to build and allow different pathways to explore and grow is going to be really, really exciting for me.
Yeah, no, I think the flexibility thing is something I didn't even think about, but that's a great point. I mean, I think that's one of the I think it's a very overlooked aspect of the situation where you'd have no salary cap, where you could build your roster however you want. You could spend your money however you want. If you want to be a team like Southampton who builds up talent and sells it on, you can do that. If you want to be a Man City and spend all your money and take risks on big time players, then you could do that. And having this flexibility is just another step towards that direction. And I think as much as I'd still like to see them do even more, especially in the depth department, I would really like to see teams be able to really build deeper rosters so that we can be competitive in these tournaments. And maybe next year we can finally see a little bit of progress with changes like these. But I think that'll be like the biggest sign that we're moving in that 4.0 direction that you were talking about, is once we start consistently competing in these other tournaments, these Champions League tournaments, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about later.
I think the other side of that too, right, is it's giving clubs the ability to pick how they build while also maintaining a level of control parity and I'll use the term safety net, right? Like it is Man City esque, right? Oh, you can go buy three players who are out there, but you're not letting them buy 15 players at 55 mil each, and now it's like, okay, well, I have no money left. Team's gone, right? This is a controlled step, which is par for the MLS course, right? We're controlled. We're going to make these changes. We're going to make sure that it's not going to put anything that we've done in jeopardy, which I do think we're closer to the point of never having to worry about that than always having to worry about that. While I don't believe we're completely past it, I do think we've gone to another level of better, right? But yeah, having that level of control is really good. And now, again, it allows them to make other changes, such as what you were alluding to before, Mr. Jump the Gun, in increased buyouts from 1 to 2 buyouts per season. Now, again, this is pretty simple, right? If you have a player on your team that's under contract for 3 years and he's not, providing the impact for what your salary hit is for him, you're able to pay that player, terminate the contract, instantly get budget flexibility, roster flexibility, and find a new way to fix that, right? Instead of having to sit there with your hands behind your back and say, okay, we're going to have to, eat it for the next 3 years and then maybe hopefully use the buyout. This year they let it buy out during the season, where last year it had to be at the end of the season. So you had to wait a whole season to get rid of somebody. Now you're allowed to do it with two different people, which again is a really, again, it just gives more flexibility and more cap space in the immediate time instead of, oh, we're not going to let you do it until the end of the season. Now you're going to have to live with it, right? So your thoughts on that? Because I know you really wanted to talk about
it. No, I think it's a great move because it's rewarding the teams that are willing to take a risk. If you're willing to take a risk and bring someone in on the hopes that there's a high ceiling there, but maybe it didn't work out, maybe they got a bunch of injuries, they just haven't been able to get on the field or be on the field consistently, or their play isn't consistent. Now, like you said, you're not stuck with them for potentially years until the contract runs out, or even having to wait an extra year just to be able to buy them out again, you can now more. It's encouraging teams to take that risk more often because you have a way to get out of it much easier. So I'm on board with it. I think hopefully that means that teams are willing to take risks on more players, whether that be younger players. I imagine this probably is going to tend to be more on the older player side. I don't think they're necessarily going to be buying out younger players. I think there's probably still value to be had or to be sold, even if younger players aren't working out. We saw it with Barco, that was someone that didn't exactly click here, but they still made good money back on him. Same with South American Player of the Year, PT Martinez. Um,
So
but
so
yeah,
this is just an Atlanta United rule. Every time they swing and miss on a young player, it's
yeah,
help them out.
yeah. Why not? I mean, it's exciting. I mean, that's what we want. We want teams to at least take the risk as opposed to just not do anything at all, like previous years Colorado's have been.
I
Maybe
knew MLS was rigged. I knew that they're doing it just for their big teams. This is ridiculous boycott.
are you predicting the comments right now,
Maybe.
or are you the comments?
I like that idea though. I didn't really think about that in terms of the risk, right? Because you're right. If you only get, there was a lot of lack of wiggle room, I guess is the way. Well, like you either get it right or you live with the consequences, and that naturally will hold you back from making these sorts of moves and decisions, right? But I do think this is actually going to be equally impactful in the short term as some of the others will. You count all the times there are players who have to stick around. Jairo Torres was a good example. How long they stick around with Jairo Torres before they were like, okay, we need to use this buyout on him, right? I understand that originally this was done so that you limit the amount of players that owners who had no idea what we were doing. We've talked about that before, right? In the past, where these roster rules were put in place because the owners who were in charge of them were football people and they just didn't know anything about soccer. They just had money and let
The
other people
Chivas example, buying players off FIFA.
yeah, literally, right? So this was to prevent them from being like, oh, we're going to take risks on players and they don't, the American football way, or heck, look at the Premier League, manager way. We'll pick let's think of a really crap team, Chelsea. So we'll pick Chelsea, where they get a manager for like 6 months, and if he doesn't bring them to the top of the table, which is mathematically impossible most of the time, he's out. And then you're paying him. I think I saw something. You're paying like $400 million to past managers over the last 10 years or something like that. I gotta quote that, but that it prevents that, right? So there's no buying and cutting and buying and cutting and buying and cutting, which again provides instability and the ability that your team may fold, right? That's what that was for. But now that we're in this new age of advanced ownership and people who understand what they're doing and good front offices, like we've spoken about, they've earned the trust to make these sorts of decisions. I think we've gotten to a point where maybe they haven't earned a complete, as you mentioned, rip off the band-aid and go spend whatever you want, but they've earned the ability to say, hey, we took a risk, it didn't work out, let's do it, let's give me a second buyout so I can cut my losses and fix it the next time, right? I think they've earned that much. And really, the thing for me is, I think this is actually going to end up being something used way more in the two buyouts, way more in the short term than the long term, right? Because they've been so handicapped over the last couple of years, they've probably got a list of players that are like, okay, we can probably cut these two players right now, save X amount on cap, and then get these players we know will fit our system better. Long term, post 2026, where we've got a more stable idea of what our team wants to be and how it's going to look. I think this is really just something that is a fail safe if something goes wrong. I think it's great for the short term. It allows you to cut the dead weight and become more competitive heading into 2026 and wherever you may be. But as we get further in and we keep making better and better decisions, I don't think it's something that's needed as much, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, a team that would benefit from that a lot, I think, is someone like Portland would have benefited from that. Like they were stuck with Yimi Chara and Nias Goda, who were constantly injured, not on the field, couldn't get consistent game time, couldn't get consistent results by the end. And a double buyout there could have freed up two more designated player spots for them, which would have been massive. I mean, that's a huge push they could make towards the end of the season if they were able to buy them out before the summer transfer window and add two more players, make that push, make the playoffs, and then who knows what can happen from there.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the whole thing, right? We're at a point now where we don't need to worry about this. Oh man, it's just the way that we're going to deal with this buyout, right? Like, oh man, we messed it up and we're gonna cut our losses, right? And then cut our losses again and cut our losses again. Eventually, we run out of the ability to cut our losses, and now we're in trouble, right? So, and again, it's not a we're taking them all away. You can cut whoever you want, whenever you want, right? It's still controlled. It's in the right direction, which is great, right? And that's the thing that I love about the way that they do their rule changes is it's always controlled. It's always strategic, always thought about. So I do really like that. But the other thing that I really like, almost a little bit more, not almost, like just a smidge more, conversion of your transfer fee into GAM. At the present moment, it's like 1.2 million of
Oh my,
all your.
wait, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to jump in. The number is so oddly specific.
I know,
Now
we
I
probably
have
should
it
have.
up.
Yeah.
I have it up. It is 1,215,506. That's what it is. Who decided that? Who was like, yes, it needs to be this number exactly? There's probably some reasoning behind it. I highly doubt it was just like, oh, let's just throw a random number out there.
My guess is it's a percentage of the available GAM done here and that GAM, so my guess is this is a percentage of available GAM that you get at the beginning of the season, right? And that GAM is a percentage of the total allowable spend on the roster, right? Something along those lines. So it gets specific because you're using percentages and then you're rounding up. Like I was shocked not to see like pennies and dimes in there, right? Like that's what I was waiting for. But yes, a very
That would be funny.
specific, yeah, a very specific number, right? Um, but now they've increased it up to 3 million. Now I know you were kind of jumping the gun here, but if you want to expand on that a little bit too.
I personally think this could be the best out of the three in terms of the new rule changes because, and don't quote me on this because GAM and TAM usage is still really confusing to me, and I'm not totally 100% sure on it because so I originally thought GAM was for making like intra-league moves, like being able to send GAM to buy like international spots, players, draft picks, whatever. And I thought TAM was what you could use to buy down salary cap impacts. But then in the article, it's talking about GAM being able to buy down salary cap impacts. So I don't know anymore. And I don't really care to figure it out at this point. But I'm just going to assume GAM could be used to build your roster out a little bit more. And so essentially tripling the amount of money that you can have in GAM, I think is amazing for working towards teams getting more depth. Having that ability to go have ambitious owners who can see, okay, we have all this GAM. Let's go spend it within the league and go find players that are really successful that can build out the depth without taking up a DP or even an international slot or a U22 slot. And now we have this stacked team because we had all this money and all this GAM and all this whatnot because we were able to build up young players and sell them on. Like, someone like a Dallas could benefit from this massively. Like Dallas is huge into building up players, selling them on, being able to collect money from like a Pepe sale and being able to then spend it in the league and rake up all this GAM and being able to build up the roster and build up the depth and be more competitive throughout the season and in multiple competitions. I see nothing but good things out of it. I'm really glad that they did this. It's long overdue. And I hope moves like this one in particular keep coming into the future. Reward the teams that are willing to invest in their youth, build them up, and sell them on for good money. Because right now, those are the guys that are bringing good attention to this league.
So just an update for you on your allocation money, confusion, which
Yes.
is fair. General allocation money reduces cap hit. So non-designated players. So I think the designated player is 600K, give or take. A non-designated player can go all the way down to 67.5 in terms of thousands of dollars, or so 67,500. So if you pay somebody 150,000 and you've got the GAM to do it, you can bring him down to the minimum roster hit with that GAM, which allows you then to be more flexible with other players, right? Designated players who are a 600 whatever hit can be brought down to 150,000. The targeted allocation money is going from designated to non-designated. So if you got somebody who's at the, 900,000 and, he's getting hit at 60 or 670, right? Let's just say it's a number. If you bring him down to 500, that's targeted. Now, targeted is being phased out. It is no longer, it's in the CBA to be phased out. So general allocation money takes over the whole process. So
Good.
that's
That's less
why,
confusing.
correct, and that's why I believe that they're starting to do this. And again, that's a belief. I don't have that written in stone or anything, so allow it.
All right,
Um,
so let me just make sure I have this right. So someone who's getting has a DP cap impact
mhm,
keeps the DP tag with GAM, but the salary cap impact goes down. Is that what it
correct,
is?
correct.
Okay.
Now you can bring it down all the way. Like it doesn't change anything outside of just the way that the budget's calculated in the roster. That's all it is.
Well, I mean that's still a good thing though
Oh
because
yeah,
if to be honest, like that's still building up the depth out of all the other places because even if you can't free up a DP spot and bring in another DP level player,
mhm.
that cap impact being a lot lower now because you have more GAM to spend allows you to spend more money to keep guys that are less than the DP tag on the team and build that depth. And I think it's a really good addition as well. Even if it's not necessarily just for spending to trade and bring in new players, like it's still being able to reduce those cap impacts will allow teams to spend more to keep talented players in this league so that they're not just moving on and continuously having to rebuild the depth again year after year.
Yeah, and here's the other thing that I took from this, right? And I'm just going to pull up for an example. We know that if you are to sell a player that is a homegrown player out of your academy, you keep all of that money, right? 1.2 million GAM transfer revenue. 1,215,506. If we're gonna be specific about it, right? If we look at somebody like Ricardo Pepi, who got sold, and I'm gonna just do it in euros because I can't be bothered to convert it. We got sold for 16.5 million euros. The comparison for how much of you just made to how much you're allowed to use in a season or convert from that is jaw dropping. This number made sense when our highest outgoing transfer was 5 mil. We're selling players more and more for these double digit figures and for high millions of figures, and we're doing more frequently, as well. As we were continuing, and again, just some other players, right? Miguel Almiron, Gaga Slanina, John Duran, like these players that, generating maybe 10% increase in GAM bit compared to what they've sold for. As the value of these players are continuing to increase, as they clearly are, that number had to go up. And I'm sure it eventually was going to, but I think it's a good thing that they've pushed it ahead because again, one, you're freeing up cap space, you're freeing up roster flexibility, which is good, but it also sets a tone for what's expected out of this league. And that's more players moving for more money to more teams that are spending dumb money because they can. Right. The it just simply couldn't because if we continue to sell people for these double digit figures and we're only allowed to what's the rest of it going into? Okay, you're going into stadium renovations, you're going into youth academy stuff, all great, but again, this was really good when that stuff wasn't common, right? When we were still building up our stadium, we're still building up our infrastructure, our training facilities, our youth development program, all that sort of stuff was really nice. MLS 2.0, 3.0. Now we're at a point where everybody's got it, everybody's using it relatively well, give or take a couple of teams. But now it's like, okay, I've got all this money, and it's great to sit on, and we're going to put it in the bank. We're going to save it for a rainy day, and especially if it's an academy player who is, everything's coming back to you, or if it's not, Miguel Almiron for 20 something, and MLS is taking 25% of it, right? Whatever. It just doesn't make sense to have this team be like, okay, you've got, and again, maybe you could put it in the pocket of the owner and say, okay, go buy a DP, but most of these teams have three already. So what are you going to do? You're just sitting on it now. And again, as much as we don't like to talk about like, oh, the owners are only in it for, profits and whatever, that's kind of like incentivizing them to do that. So it's good to give them this opportunity now to reinvest because the money now just goes straight into your investment pool rather than into your pocket, right?
Yeah, I mean, to your point before, 8 out of the top 10 transfer sales in MLS's history have been since 2020.
Right.
So it's exactly as you, and honestly, the other two were right outside of it, 2018, 2019 season. So every single one of these top moves has been in recent years. Be that because of inflation, be that because of increased talent coming through the youth system, but there is more money coming in, and so more money needs to be allowed for teams to be able to reinvest and not just in youth academies and stadium buildings. Because I think there's money across the board to do both of those things. And teams will continue to make money, the ones that are putting in the effort to. Like Chicago's and Dallas's and Red Bulls and Phillies are going to continue to sell players and continue to make money. And because of that, they'll have enough money to be able to invest in the stadium still, invest in the youth academies, and then still have leftover where they can then have that advantage in the league because they were willing to bet on their youth academy and invest in there.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? Like, and people make a very good point when they bring up this gripe, right? Where we've got this $2.5 billion deal, and people were selling players on for all this profit, and we're not allowing the teams to make this change. That's fair, right? That's a fair gripe, and something that I completely understand for the people who are wanting this league to grow faster, stronger, better, right? This is a very good controlled way to do it, because I think everybody was expecting, like, oh, just rip it off, go floor ceiling spending limits, and then from there let them do whatever they want, right? That probably was never going to happen. However, this allows them way more flexibility, and it's a really nice controlled way to say, okay, we're gonna increase what you can now spend, which is great. And again, what this, I believe, is going to do long term, right? And then we'll move on here. Eventually, is going to make this stuff not needed for, again, I had a better word for it, but I couldn't think of it. Not needed. When you get $3 million, and now we're reading through all of these notes, right? Oh, well, GAM can take your DP hit down to 150, and your non DP, you can take your entire team and minimize their rosters down to, everybody's down to 100K, right? And if you're doing that at the same time that your salary spending limit continues to raise, well, now you've got all this free room where you're going to be able to move things around. You're not going to need the GAM or TAM anymore. You're going to be able to just focus on how you're applying your money better, right? So I think this is a good in the moment move, but also expands upon the future to say, we've proven we may not need these anymore, and then go to more of a natural system, if that makes sense. I kind of butchered the words there because I couldn't really think of the right way to describe that, but I hope that got across right.
Yep, I got you. I'm following.
Yeah. Well, I don't care if you're following me. I care if our listeners are following me.